Welcome to 10-Minute Murder, brief and bingeable true crime. I'm Joe, the host, and thank you for joining. Today we're not going to beat around the bush, not going to go into a whole bunch of things before the actual story begins, but I will tell you two things. First of all, Team Selena, obviously. And if this is your first time listening to 10-Minute Murder, please hit subscribe wherever you're listening, and you will never miss an episode in the future. It'll come right to you. And if you've been listening a while, you enjoy the show, let your friends and family know about 10-Minute Murder. Everything you need to know is at 10minutemurder.com. Now, let's get to the story. Most of us in the true crime community see serial killers as terrifying, but also fascinating, like a car crash you can't quite look away from. But a small number of true crime fans are fascinated with serial killers for a different reason. They view them as idols. From his childhood, Joel Rifkin was obsessed with serial killers, especially Jack the Ripper, the notorious murderer who brutally killed prostitutes in London in the late 1800s. As an adult, Joel took his obsession with Jack the Ripper to the next level, killing as many as 17 sex workers in less than 5 years. One of the essential parts of talking about a killer is diving into their childhood. It's hard to tell what's more unsettling, if there's a recipe of childhood trauma that seems to guarantee the kid is going to grow up a murderer, or if the killer had a relatively happy childhood and decided to kill anyway. In Joel Rifkin's case, there was very little childhood happiness to speak of. Joel was born in 1959 as the child of two unmarried teenagers and adopted by an older couple 3 weeks later. However, his adoption didn't make his life any easier. He struggled with schoolwork, and he found it difficult to make friends. Instead, the other kids made fun of him for the slow, plodding way that he would walk and his hunched-over posture, giving him the nickname the Turtle, or Lardass. In 1972, teenage Joel watched a movie, Frenzy, which was directed by Alfred Hitchcock and based on the crimes of the infamous serial killer Jack the Ripper. Frenzy seemed to unlock a dual hyperfixation, which Joel would never escape: serial killing and prostitutes. As soon as he got his first car, he went on to prowl the streets, trying to pick up women to have sex with. For a guy who had been constantly rejected throughout his life, it seemed like picking up prostitutes finally put Joel in the position of power and control. Despite his setbacks, Joel managed to graduate from high school and even went on to college. He tried it multiple times, but never quite managed to earn a degree. Instead, he started working as a landscaper, and it seemed like he had escaped his tough start to life until 1987 came around. Joel's father, Bernard, was diagnosed with prostate cancer and took his own life that February. Joel continued picking up prostitutes, but this became another area of his life where he was unlucky. He was getting robbed and swindled by pimps countless times, including getting scammed by the same prostitute on more than one occasion. Later that year, Joel's habit of picking up prostitutes caught up with him. Joel was busted in an undercover police operation while attempting to hire a prostitute, not realizing that the woman he had approached was actually an undercover officer, who then arrested him. Joel was fined for solicitation of prostitution, but he managed to make sure that his mother, who could have been mortified, did not find out about the incident. And did that arrest stop Joel from soliciting prostitutes in the future? Absolutely not. It became a guilty pleasure over the next few years. Instead, he just looked for prostitutes further away from his house. In the backstory of many killers, there's some sort of turning point. Getting arrested in 1987, by all accounts, seemed to be Joel's turning point. He grew more and more fascinated with prostitution. In particular, he was interested in how serial killers seemed to pick prostitutes as the perfect, easy targets. He collected newspaper clippings and books that studied serial killers who targeted prostitutes. A couple in particular, Arthur Shawcross and the Green River Killer, As this interest grew and grew, it wasn't enough for Joel to just learn about these killers. He wanted to join them. He started out slow, waiting until his mother, who he still lived with, was out of town. But Joel's first murder didn't match up to expectations, and he was disappointed in the experience. His victim, a sex worker named Susie, had fought back, not succumbing to Joel's beatings and then viciously biting him on the hand. When he finally managed to strangle the woman to death, he was then faced with the task of cleaning up the blood that splattered his living room and dismembering Susie's body so that he could dispose of it. It was so much harder work than he had anticipated. Finally, he drove through Manhattan to New Jersey in his mother's car, disposed of Susie's head by hiding it inside a paint can, which he dumped in the woods along with her legs, and then dumped the remaining pieces of her body back in Manhattan by throwing them into a river. Despite Joel's efforts to make sure Susie's body disappeared, it hadn't been careful enough, and the paint can containing her head was found by a golfer later that year. Joel was distraught when Susie's body was discovered and followed the case closely. His panic only increased when police revealed that his victim had been positive for HIV. Susie was never fully identified, and it remains that way to this day. Joel's confidence was knocked by bungling his first murder. He waited over a year to kill again. He targeted this time another sex worker, Julie Blackbird, picking her because he liked how she looked. After the pair spent the night together, Joel beat her and strangled her to death. He wanted to commit necrophilia with Julie's corpse out of admiration for Ted Bundy, another serial killer that Joel admired, but he couldn't bring himself to do it, finding that the idea of it disgusted him. Instead, Joel dismembered Julie's body and stored the pieces in buckets in a milk crate, which he weighed down with cement and dropped in multiple rivers. This time, his caution paid off. Julie's remains were never found. From that day forward, Joel's obsession with murdering sex workers took over his life. It was all he could think about. He killed seemingly at random, sparing several of the prostitutes who he visited regularly while choosing others as his victims. From 1990 to 1993, the frequency of his crimes increased, and despite some of the bodies being discovered, he wasn't caught. The end of Joel Rifkin's good run of luck came with his last victim, a heroin-addicted sex worker named Tiffany Bresciani. After he returned home with Tiffany's body still wrapped in tarps in the trunk of his mother's car, Joel was approached by his mother, who asked for the car keys so that she could go shopping. Joel was terrified that his mother would discover Tiffany's corpse, but during her 30-minute trip to the shops, she never opened the trunk. 3 days later, Joel finally got the chance to dispose of Tiffany's body, and as he was on his way to dump her remains, a state trooper vehicle appeared in his rearview mirror after noticing that he didn't have a license plate on the car. Joel refused to stop, even when the troopers turned on their siren and ordered him out of the car. The troopers called for reinforcements and gave chase, which ended after 10 minutes when Joel crashed into a lamppost. Ironically, the lamppost was right outside the courthouse where Joel's trial would take place. It was over. Joel stepped out of the car and officers approached. For police, what had started as a ticket for not having a license plate quickly snowballed into the discovery of a serial murderer after they investigated the smell coming from Joel's trunk. In his 8-hour-long interrogation, Joel told police that he'd committed 17 murders, wrote down the names of his victims, and drew maps to where their remains could be found. He didn't seem emotionally moved by his crimes at all, calling them incidents and referring to his victims by numbers instead of by their names. A media storm surrounded the case, and the similarity of Joel's crimes to his idol, Jack the Ripper, did not go unnoticed. Joel was dubbed with the nickname Joel the Ripper, but unlike his predecessor, he had to face the charges for his crimes. Despite openly confessing to the murders of 17 women, Joel insisted on pleading not guilty because he thought that he could escape justice by pleading insanity. He could not have been more wrong. He was unable to convince the jury that he was insane and was offered 46 years to life in return for a guilty plea, but instead he was sentenced to a 203-year sentence, not eligible for parole until 2197, at the hypothetical age of 228.